It was supposed to be just another investigation. But that winter evening in 1977 marked the day Ed and Lorraine Warren came face to face with the darkest force they'd ever encountered. This wasn't just a haunting. This wasn't possession. This was the devil himself. What began as a plea from a desperate priest led the Warrens into the decaying corridors of an abandoned monastery in the Connecticut woods, a place shrouded in silence and secrets. And what they found waiting for them would not only challenge their faith, but shake the very core of their beliefs. Were they prepared to confront the source of all evil? The wind that whipped through the trees on that bleak January evening carried more than just the chill of winter. It carried something ancient, something malignant. Ed Warren adjusted the collar of his coat, his breath forming clouds in the air as he stood beside Lorraine outside a modest church tucked into the hills of Litchfield County, Connecticut. The church was old, colonial in style, its steeple rising solemnly against a darkening sky. Inside, the flickering candlelight of the sanctuary gave the space a warm glow, but the atmosphere was anything but comforting. Father Benedict, a man of stern expression and tired eyes, stood waiting by the altar. His hands trembled slightly as he motioned the couple forward. "You came quickly," he said, voice hoarse, as though he hadn't spoken aloud in days. "We don't waste time when someone calls for help like you did," Ed replied, eyeing the shadows that seemed unnaturally long in the corners of the room. "You said you've encountered something unholy?" Father Benedict didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly to the side chamber, retrieved a worn leather-bound journal, and placed it carefully on the altar. Lorraine, already sensing the heaviness in the air, narrowed her eyes and instinctively clutched the crucifix beneath her blouse. "I have served the church for over 40 years, the priest began. "I've seen signs, possessions, poltergeists. But this is different. It doesn't possess the living. It devours the spirit. It doesn't haunt places. It anchors itself to sin." He opened the journal, revealing sketches, notes, and pages stained by something dark that resembled ink or blood. It began with an old monastery, abandoned since the early 1900s, nestled deep in the woods near Torrington. No one goes there anymore, not even animals. But something has awakened. A caretaker, a man of faith, vanished without a trace 2 weeks ago. We found his rosary, melted. Lorraine shuddered. Ed's jaw tightened. "We've heard of this place," Ed said. "St. Augustine's. It was shut down after a string of mysterious deaths. There were rumors even back then. Voices, figures in the fog, monks driven to madness." Father Benedict nodded gravely. "They tried to seal it, bury it, under holy ground, but something remains. And now it's stronger. It's calling out." "To whom?" Lorraine asked softly. The priest looked directly at her, eyes glinting with fear. "To you." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The crackle of the candle seemed to roar in the quiet sanctuary. Lorraine felt a sharp sting in her temples. A sign. Not just a haunting. A summoning. "We're being lured," she whispered. Father Benedict placed a hand on Ed's shoulder. "I would never ask this if it wasn't beyond anything I've ever encountered. But you two, you've faced the dark and lived to tell. This time, you may not come back." Ed and Lorraine exchanged a long glance. This was different. They could feel it. A pressure, like something ancient was already watching, already aware of their decision. "We'll go," Ed said, his voice low, steady. "But we'll go prepared." As they stepped out into the icy night, Lorraine paused at the threshold of the church. She turned back toward the altar. For a brief moment, she saw a shadow standing behind it, tall, horned, and smiling. She didn't tell Ed. She would, eventually, but not yet. The forest road that led to the ruins of St. Augustine's monastery was one seldom used, worn thin by time and weather. The Warrens' van creaked as it rolled over broken gravel and fallen branches. the headlights barely penetrating the dense wall of fog that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was as if the mist were deliberately hiding the path, warning intruders to turn back. Lorraine sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in prayer. Her eyes, half closed, flickered with the images that had begun tormenting her since the moment they left the church. Twisted faces, tongue speaking backward, burning eyes watching her from behind walls that breathed. Ed kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the crucifix hanging from the rearview mirror. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lorraine nodded. "It's not just waiting for us, it's expecting us." The trees grew thicker, curling like claws over the road. And then, without warning, the fog parted. Before them stood the monastery. Time had not been kind to St. Augustine's. What remained of the stone structure was half swallowed by ivy and rot. The windows were shattered, and its bell tower leaned as if about to fall. Despite its decay, the building loomed like a giant carcass, empty but dangerous. They parked the van and stepped out. The temperature dropped sharply. The fog, unnaturally heavy, clung to their clothes and skin, cold and wet like breath. Lorraine's breath hitched. "It's still alive," she whispered. Inside, the silence was absolute. No echo of their steps, no distant drip of water, not even the creak of the broken beams above. It was as though the very air had been stolen. From the monastery, a vacuum of time and sound. They moved carefully, flashlights sweeping across old pews and shattered icons. The altar was gone. In its place was a scorched circle on the stone floor, as if something had burned straight through the earth itself. Lorraine paused, eyes wide. She turned slowly in place. "It's here." Suddenly, from the far end of the sanctuary came the sound of movement, deliberate, slow, heavy. Ed raised his flashlight, hand steady despite the rising tension. "Who's there?" No answer. They followed the sound through a narrow corridor, deeper into the ruined structure. The passage narrowed, the walls closer than they should have been. Lorraine brushed against something, not stone, but skin. Cold, damp, and gone in a flash. They burst into what must have once been a dining hall. Long rotted tables were overturned, and the remnants of monks' robes lay in piles, as though the wearers had simply vanished mid-meal. In the center of the room stood a statue of Christ, or what was left of it. The head had been broken off, the arms twisted backward. Its eyes, once open in salvation, had been gouged out. Lorraine clutched her chest. Its mocking faith. A growl, low, guttural, not animal, rumbled through the hall. Ed turned. Behind them, the door they'd entered through had vanished. Only a solid wall remained, then the lights of their flashlights flickered. One by one, candles began to ignite themselves along the walls. The flame was black. Lorraine stepped forward, trembling, her voice shaking. "Show yourself." And it did. From the far end of the hall, a figure emerged. Tall, featureless, its skin the color of smoke. Horns curled backward from its skull, and, where its eyes should have been, there was only void. It did not walk. It floated. Lorraine collapsed to her knees. Ed stepped in front of her. "In the name of Christ, I command," but the figure raised a hand and the words turned to ash in Ed's mouth. This wasn't a demon. This was older, stronger, laughing. "What did you think of the story so far? What do you think the Warren couple is facing at this moment? Leave your opinion in the comments and stay with us. There's still much more to come." It didn't move closer. It didn't speak, but its presence filled the air like smoke, thick and choking. Lorraine tried to look up, to meet its eyes, or rather, the absence of them, but her body refused. She felt as if 100 invisible hands were pressing down on her, suffocating every breath of faith from her lungs. Ed, unable to speak, reached for the small vial of holy water in his coat pocket. His hand trembled as he uncorked it and flung a splash toward the figure. The droplets froze midair and shattered before reaching it. Not evaporated, not absorbed, shattered. The figure tilted its head, not with curiosity but with contempt. As though amused by the gesture, Lorraine whispered, "It's studying us." "Then let's give it nothing to learn," Ed said, grabbing Lorraine's hand and pulling her to her feet. They backed away, retreating to the far end of the hall. As they moved, the black flames dimmed and the shadows behind the broken furniture began to stir. Shapes began to emerge, emaciated, faceless, crawling on all fours, dozens of them. They moved without sound, like marionettes on strings, their heads twitching violently as if reacting to some silent command. Lorraine gasped, Those are monks." "What?" Ed looked closer, and then he saw the remains of robes, the tatters of worn crosses around their necks. "They're what's left of them," she whispered. Their faith wasn't enough. The demonic figure raised its hand again, and the room groaned, its walls pulsing like lungs. The ground beneath them cracked, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into the earth. No light emerged from it, only a sound. Low chanting, in a language neither of them could recognize yet felt intimately familiar. Ancient. Damned. Ed turned to Lorraine. "We're not leaving, are we?" She shook her head, face pale. "We were never meant to leave." They descended. The staircase seemed endless, as if spiraling down through layers of time and pain. Lorraine clutched Ed's arm tighter with each step. The air grew colder, and with each breath they could feel their thoughts becoming heavier, as though the space itself was draining their memories, their resolve. At the bottom, they entered. A narrow corridor lined with cell doors. Each one bore a name scratched into the wood, Latin inscriptions. Some had been burned, others bled. Behind one of them, something knocked softly. Once, twice, then silence. Ed pushed open the central door. Inside was a small room with stone walls. At the center sat a man, or what looked like one. He was kneeling, his back to them, muttering the same chant they'd heard above. Lorraine stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" The figure turned. It was the caretaker, or what remained of him. His eyes were gone, his mouth sewn shut with coarse thread. On his forehead was a deep carved symbol, an inverted triangle within a circle, surrounded by a serpent devouring its own tail. He reached out with both hands and placed something on the floor between them. A torn page from an ancient book. On it, an illustration, crude but unmistakable. A being, crowned with horns, devouring the souls of robed figures while a circle of fire surrounded them. Above it, one word, Domitor, Latin for the subjugator. Lorraine's voice cracked. "This isn't a demon. It's something worse," Eddie whispered. "What's worse than a demon?" "A fallen seraph, a being made for light, twisted for darkness." The caretaker let out a muffled scream and collapsed, his body crumbling into ash. Then the chanting stopped, and the door behind them slammed shut. Ed and Lorraine stood frozen in the silence of the cell, the heavy thud of the slamming door echoing like a final judgment. The candlelight from the hallway outside had vanished, leaving them in a suffocating dark that seemed to press inward from all directions. The stone walls, impossibly smooth, began to vibrate with a sound too low to hear but impossible not to feel. A deep thrum that pulsed in time with something vast and terrible. Lorraine moved slowly to the ash pile where the caretaker had fallen. She reached toward it, hesitated, then let her fingers hover just above. As if alive, the ashes pulled away, recoiling as if in pain. They began to shift, not randomly, but with intelligence, forming lines, curves, a symbol. The same one the caretaker bore, a circle, a triangle, the serpent consuming itself. It pulsed once, then collapsed back into dust. "It's marking us," she murmured. Ed circled the room, running his hand along the stone, until something strange happened. His palm passed through the wall, not like phasing through mist. No. The stone bent inward, rippling like the surface of water, but with resistance. It was a threshold. Lorraine. She joined him as the wall slowly folded open, revealing a corridor bathed in deep red light. It wasn't just an architectural anomaly. The air smelled wrong, like rust, old meat, and the damp breath of a sealed crypt. The corridor wasn't on any blueprint. It shouldn't exist. They stepped through. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The temperature didn't drop. It changed in waves, cold one second, stiflingly hot the next, like the very laws of nature were unraveling. Lorraine pressed her back to the wall, heart pounding. The corridor was lined with artwork, oil paintings, some massive, some small, and all grotesque. Each depicted horrific scenes: monks flayed alive, angels weeping blood, churches collapsing into pits of fire. But more disturbing were the ones still unfinished, their figures blurry, like they were still being painted by unseen hands. She stopped before one. It was her, painted in violent reds and blacks, kneeling in a pool of blood, her face twisted in silent agony. Ed's corpse was in the background, nailed to an altar. "It's not showing us visions," she said in a hushed voice. "It's showing us possibilities, outcomes. It's psychological warfare," Ed muttered, pulling her forward. At the end of the corridor stood a door, but it wasn't made of wood or iron. It was made of flesh, pink, veined, throbbing with each beat like a giant heart. It smelled of birth and death, sacredness defiled. "This shouldn't exist," Lorraine whispered. "And yet here it is," Ed replied. He pressed his palm to the door. It opened with a sound like tearing sinew. What lay beyond was vast, a chamber with no floor, no ceiling. The space defied logic. Gravity bent inward, with dozens of floating crosses rotating slowly, each one inverted, glowing with a sick light. They floated in a spiral, like stars orbiting a black hole. In the center was a throne, built from bones, human and not. And on that throne sat the entity. It was not resting, it was waiting. The subjugator. Its body was ever shifting, wings of ash, horns of gold, eyes that became mouths, and mouths that became nothing. A crown of light burned above its head, held in place by rusted nails. Ed raised his crucifix, but the moment it met the air of the chamber, it disintegrated. "Faith has no place here," Lorraine whispered, clutching her rosary so tightly it drew blood. The subjugator tilted its head, and it smiled. The subjugator's smile wasn't a gesture of humor. It was a calculated, cruel acknowledgement, like a predator recognizing its prey's final breath. Its form continued to morph with each passing second. Wings made of fractured mirrors, a face that inverted itself, skin shifting between obsidian and rotting ivory. Ed's knees nearly buckled under the pressure that seemed to radiate from the throne itself. Not heat, not cold, but memory, pain, and something far more ancient. Lorraine's breathing grew shallow. Her rosary, clutched in white-knuckled fists, vibrated with a strange energy. She wasn't simply afraid. She was remembering things she had never lived. Dreams that weren't hers, screams that echoed from lifetimes long past. The subjugator was not just showing them horror, it was inviting them to relive it. Ed raised his crucifix with trembling resolve. "In the name of Christ." Before he could finish, the entity raised one finger. The crucifix withered in Ed's hand like burnt parchment, disintegrating in midair. No sound, no violence, just quiet, erasure. "It's unmaking faith," Lorraine whispered. Not challenging it, unmaking it. The chamber darkened. From the corners of the impossible space, shadows began to pour like blood from open wounds in the stone. At first slow and shapeless, they soon gained form. Elongated, hunched figures dragging themselves forward on limbs too many to count. Each wore fragments of robes, charred collars, rusted crucifixes melted into their chests. Their heads bore no eyes, no mouths, just smooth skin where identity once lived. Whispers followed them. Disembodied voices began to echo in the air, weaving around one another in rising, falling cadence. Latin phrases, some familiar, most corrupted, fiat. "Voluntas tua, de lumen est fractum, tenebrae non sequuntur dominamus." Thy will be done. The light of God is shattered. Darkness does not follow. It rules. The whispers intensified, multiplying in number and depth until they became a chorus. It wasn't sound, it was weight. psychic, emotional. Ed felt it crushing his chest. Memories of his childhood, his first confession, the day he married Lorraine, all warping under the pressure of that chorus. Lorraine clutched her head, tears spilling freely. She saw flashes, nuns with black tongues whispering over infants, churches inverted, holy water boiling in its fonts. These were not hallucinations. They were truths the subjugator had birthed. Then, a change. From within the mass of shadows, one stepped forward. A single figure, taller than the others, wearing full clerical robes. His face was hidden beneath a rusted iron mask, a bishop's mitre twisted and burned. In his hands, a Bible, one that dripped blood. He opened it, but what he read was not scripture, it was prophecy. In a voice deeper than the grave, the figure recited, Et lux obmutuit, et Deus iacuit, et homo adoravit umbram. And the light was silenced, and God lay fallen, and man worshipped the shadow. The subjugator stood from the throne. The chamber quaked, the floating crucifixes spun faster, reversing their orbits as flames erupted from the black void above. Ed grabbed Lorraine's hand and backed away. We need to anchor, he said. We need something real. She nodded. Each other. Lorraine shut her eyes and whispered their wedding vows, focusing on the moment they were joined, in the presence of light, of grace. The chamber screamed, not sound, rejection, pain. The illusion cracked. For one moment, they were back in the field, in daylight, with a child crying near the tree line. Ed looked around. This isn't real. The child turned. His face was Ed's, bloodied, hollow. Lorraine gritted her teeth. It's testing our will. And the illusion shattered completely. They were back in the throne room. The shadows were gone, but the subjugator was closer, standing only a breath away, smiling still. The proximity of the subjugator warped the very fabric of the chamber. Time fractured. Sounds became fragmented echoes of themselves, looping and distorting. Lorraine's thoughts felt pulled in all directions, some to the past, some to memories she never lived, others to futures too terrifying to consider. Every moment in its presence was like standing at the edge of a cosmic abyss, staring down into something that hated the very notion of creation. Ed moved first. He didn't run. He knelt, not in submission, but to ground himself, to remind his body that there was still a world beyond this place. He gripped the cold stone floor and prayed under his breath, clinging to every syllable like a lifeline. Lorraine remained standing, but her eyes rolled back slightly, her hands trembling. It's entering my mind, she whispered. It's rewriting me. The subjugator raised both arms. From the ceiling, or what passed for a ceiling, fell chains of ice. They didn't clang. They landed in perfect silence, wrapping around the air itself, binding light. Wherever they touched, warmth vanished, and breath crystallized. One chain struck Ed's arm. He cried out, but no wound appeared, just a patch of skin so cold it smoked. It burns like fire, he gasped. Lorraine extended her arms wide, summoning the last of her spiritual strength. She called not upon her own will, but upon the names of the saints, of Michael, of Gabriel, of all who had defied darkness before. The subjugator recoiled, not from fear, but from irritation. It spoke this time aloud. The voice was layered. Male, female, child, beast, and something that had no name. You persist, you cling to the lie. You think light is truth, but truth is the fire that devours both. Lorraine shouted, We don't fear truth. We fear you because you know what you've become. The chamber convulsed. A vortex opened beneath them. Not air, not water, memory itself. Faces swirled within it. Past victims, old priests, monks, long forgotten. Lorraine's own face appeared in the maelstrom, screaming. She stepped back. The subjugator moved forward. Then it stopped, because Ed stood between them, holding not a crucifix, not a relic, but a photo of their daughter. The one entity paused in that single pause. Lorraine saw something, a sliver of memory buried deep in the subjugator's shifting form. A time when it too was light. She gasped. It remembers. Love. The entity screamed. The room exploded in light and dark. Thank you so much for sticking with us this far. Your presence is what keeps us going and telling these chilling stories. But don't leave now. What's coming challenges everything the Warrens believed was possible. The best is yet to come. When Lorraine opened her eyes, she was no longer in the throne room. She was alone. The ground beneath her was liquid shadow, rippling but solid underfoot. Above her stretched an endless void, not black, but colorless. The absence of existence. She tried to move, but gravity itself seemed uncertain, shifting with each step. There was no sound, not even her own heartbeat. She was inside the abyss, not metaphorical, not symbolic. The abyss the subjugator had once fallen through. She turned slowly. Around her were doors, thousands of them, suspended in midair, stacked in every direction. Each door pulsed with energy. She approached one and heard sobbing. On the other side, another door whispered her name in a voice that belonged to her mother. Each one a test, each one a trap. She chose none. Instead, she fell to her knees, closed her eyes, and began to speak to the one being she believed could still hear her, Ed. Wherever he was, she believed they were still connected, and he heard her. In the real world, or whatever now passed for it, Ed clutched the photo tighter, whispering her name over and over again. The subjugator circled him, no longer speaking, only watching. In the abyss, Lorraine began to glow. Not blindingly, not brightly, just a soft, persistent light. The light of defiance, of union, of faith. She spoke. Aloud. You fell, but you did not vanish. You remembered pain, and now I remember you. The doors trembled. One by one, they began to swing open. Screams, laughter, prayers, all poured out. And Lorraine stood. The subjugator shuddered. It felt something it had not in eons. Doubt. Ed Warren stood alone in the chamber once filled with inverted crosses and blasphemous symbols. But something had shifted. The subjugator no longer taunted him. It circled him in silence like a vulture waiting for death. The air had changed. It wasn't colder, it was emptier. Deprived of presence, as if the entity were drawing back, curious, watching him not as prey, but as something else. Ed's knuckles were white around the photograph of his daughter. In the face of divine darkness, he clung not to doctrine or ritual, but to love, to something deeper than belief. The subjugator spoke without sound. You are a builder of walls, belief, order, discipline. Yet I see what lies behind. Ed did not flinch. You doubt, it said. You wonder where your God was when others died. You begged him in Amityville, in Enfield, in the blood-stained bedroom of David Glatzel. You cried out, and silence answered. Ed took a step forward. Silence, he replied, is not absence. The subjugator laughed. The sound peeled through, the chamber like blades scraping stone. Your wife stands on the edge of oblivion. You could join her, but the price is simple. Accept the truth. Accept me. A vision appeared. Lorraine, kneeling in the abyss, alone, cold, surrounded by endless doors. One showed her lifeless body in his arms. Another, her madness. Another, her soul bound in chains of fire. Ed's heart ached. Choose, the entity said, or lose. He closed his eyes and remembered her voice, not in fear, but in laughter. The way she sang hymns when she cooked. The gentle way she touched cursed objects in the museum, as if even evil deserved understanding. He dropped the photo and reached for the floor. There he began to draw, not a pentagram, not a cross, but a symbol of his own making. It was rough, awkward, but every line was a prayer, a circle, a flame, a heart. The subjugator paused. What is this? It asked. Ed opened his eyes. My faith, not yours to corrupt, not borrowed, mine. The floor ignited in white flame. The entity recoiled and screamed far below. Lorraine looked up. She felt warmth and knew Ed had chosen. Lorraine stood in the abyss, her glow stronger now. The doors around her had ceased to whisper. Instead, they waited, observing. The abyss itself seemed unsettled, as if unsure whether to expel her or devour her. A sound split the silence. A heartbeat. Not hers, not Ed's. The subjugator was here, but this time, it did not appear as a beast. It appeared as a man, clean robes, gentle eyes, a familiar face, one that Lorraine remembered from dreams. He looked like the angel statues she once prayed beside as a child. "Lorraine," he said. She flinched. "I can offer peace," the voice said. "No more hauntings, no more death. You and Ed can rest. No more darkness. Just sleep. Eternal, soft, without pain." "And the price?" she asked. He smiled. "Let go. Of love, of duty, of the weight. Let me bear it." She stepped back. "You're not offering peace, you're offering surrender." The figure sighed. "Then allow me to offer this. Knowledge. I will show you what you have never known, what the church hides, what your husband fears. You've always wanted to understand why the dark exists. I can tell you. I already know," she said quietly. "Because it has to." He froze. "The dark exists so that we choose the light. Not blindly, but knowingly." The illusion cracked. The angelic face twisted. Horns erupted once more. Fire split the abyss. "You will not walk out of this," it growled, but Lorraine smiled. "I won't need to." Above her, a beam of light exploded. Ed's faith had torn through dimensions. The abyss screamed, and the subjugator faltered. Lorraine closed her eyes and stepped forward. The beam of light tore through the abyss like a sword forged from eternity. Neither sun nor fire, but pure resolve. Lorraine felt its pull, not like gravity, but like purpose. Around her, the doors shattered one by one, their illusions dissolving into ash. The subjugator, now in its truest form, and ever-shifting. Massive wings, horns, eyes, and void, screamed not in rage but in fear. It recoiled. The light was not divine. It wasn't blessed by any church. It was human. It was love. Ed reached through the collapsing veil between dimensions, his hand barely visible, surrounded by swirling flames and shadows. Lorraine ran. The ground beneath her broke apart with every step, but the light beneath it held. Each time she stumbled, a memory rose to lift her. Ed holding her after a failed exorcism, their daughter's first smile. The night she first realized her gift wasn't a curse. She leapt. Their hands touched, and the abyss shattered. They fell through silence, not downward, but inward, spiraling through moments, confessions, prayers, screams, until they hit the white floor of the monastery with a jolt that knocked the breath from their lungs. It was dawn. The ruins stood in quiet, the air still heavy, but the presence gone. The fog had lifted, the walls no longer pulsed, and the inverted crosses were nothing more than cracked stone. Lorraine sat up slowly. Her face was streaked with ash, but her eyes were clear. Ed crawled to her side, wrapping his arms around her. "It's over," she whispered. Ed didn't respond right away. He was staring at the center of the altar room. The throne was gone, the darkness dispersed. But etched into the stone floor was a message, burned in with precision. "He who remembers, returns." Lorraine traced the words with her fingers. "It wasn't a victory," she said. "It was a delay." Ed nodded. "But sometimes, a delay is enough." They left the monastery in silence. Back at home, Lorraine placed the torn page from the caretaker's journal into a locked case. The symbol of the subjugator still burned on its surface, faintly pulsing. In the museum's dim light, it was barely noticeable. Tony Spera, their son-in-law, entered the room. "Did you find what was calling you?" Ed looked at Lorraine, then answered, "No, it found us." That night, as Lorraine closed her eyes, she heard the faintest whisper, a voice, not malevolent but familiar. "You chose the light." She didn't answer aloud, but her dreams were free of darkness, for now.